Hello and welcome to the world's tightest community. I'm Mathilde, and this is the episode I want you to start with if you're new here. Maybe someone sent it to you. Maybe you typed something into Google at 2 a.m. that you've never said out loud to another person. Maybe you've been dealing with this for years and you still do not have a name for it. Whoever you are, I want you to know a few things before we go any further. You are by no means alone. In fact, you fall under this stat of 1 in 4 women or people with vulvas who will at some point experience pelvic or vulvovaginal pain. And what you're experiencing has a reason, even if no one has been able to tell you what that reason is yet. And on this podcast, you'll see that we go deep on these types of topics. But for this episode, I'm going to keep it simple because when you're in pain and nothing is making sense, the last thing you need is more complicated information. So I want to give you the basics and I want to give you a starting point. And I also want to give you some sense of hope because hope is the thing that kept me going when nothing else did. So before we get into anything else, I want to check if you're in the right place. Are you experiencing pain during sex? Pain when you try to use a tampon? Pain when you sit for too long? Or pain when you wear tight jeans? Or a burning that just does not go away? Pain down there that your doctor cannot explain or has dismissed or has told you is just stress. If any of that sounds like you are in the right place. This podcast exists for you. And I'm not going to throw a lot of medical terms at you yet. We will get to those, but I want to start where most of us actually start, which is something hurts and I do not know why. And I'm scared and I feel lonely and no one seems to understand. That is the beginning of almost every story I hear, also including mine. And I started this podcast because I needed it to exist and because at some point I got really, really sick of the fact that it did not. Because I have been through this. I have had the pain, the confusion, the appointments that went nowhere. I've been told it's in my head. I've been told to relax, to try harder, to wait it out. I've been given creams that did not work and advice that did not apply and left appointments feeling worse than when I walked in. And somewhere along the way, sitting with what felt like the 100th dismissal, I got really, really angry. Not at any one doctor, but at the bigger picture, at the fact that millions of us are walking around with a condition that nobody is taking seriously, at the fact that this is not in the mainstream, not in the conversation, not on the research agenda, not on the funding agenda, not really anywhere. A whole area of the body, a whole category of suffering, and somehow we have collectively decided it's not worth talking about. So I started talking about it. And my whole tagline for this podcast is, I do the research so you don't have to. This is what I'm here for. I go deep, I read the papers, I find the specialists, I ask them the questions I wish someone had answered for me a long time ago, and then I bring it back to you in a way that is actually usable. You should not have to become a part-time medical researcher to get decent care. But until the system catches up, I hope that this will be a resource to you. And the name of this podcast, The World's Tightest Community, says a lot about what I want this space to be. Because yes, it points to the physical tightness that a lot of us deal with. It's also about how tightly connected we are to each other once we find each other. And that is the part I care about most, because this space exists because I felt so incredibly lonely and isolated during my own Vulvodynia and Vaginismus journey. And then I started talking to people and realized just how much of a common experience we have. And just being able to speak about it out loud meant the world to me. And the fascinating thing is that we all have such different stories about how the pain first started, what our symptoms look like, what the root cause is, what works, what doesn't. And still underneath all of that, there is this weird shared experience running through every single one of us. So if you feel lonely in this, I would really just stay here for a bit and see if you can feel some of that, because you truly are not alone. More people are in this with you than you could possibly imagine. So before we go further, I want to be clear about what this podcast covers, because the scope is pretty broad. We're talking about chronic vulvovaginal and pelvic pain. Now, that is a big umbrella, and under it sits a whole range of conditions. And I'm going to name some of them, partly because I want you to start collecting the vocabulary, and partly because most people who eventually land on a diagnosis spent years not knowing any of these words existed. I certainly did not. Some of the most common ones include provoked vestibulodynia, generalized vulvodynia, vaginismus, pudendal neuralgia, interstitial cystitis, lichen sclerosus, endometriosis. Like, these are not the only ones. There are more. And the pain itself can show up in a lot of different ways. For some people, it is a burning that never really lets up. For others, it's this sharp, knife-like or rawness feeling or itching that you just cannot scratch away. For some, it's only with penetration. For others, it is sitting through a meeting in jeans that suddenly just feels impossible. It can mimic a UTI so closely that you go to urgent care convinced you have one, and the test just comes back negative again and again. So when I talk about the idea of this on the podcast, I'm holding all of that in the frame at once. And I do that on purpose because I know it can feel strange to lump such different experiences together. And your story is not going to be identical to someone else's story. But I think it makes sense to talk about these things in the same space because the mainstream barely acknowledges any of them. We've been lumped together into one quiet, under-researched corner of medicine for decades. And I think the least we can do is find each other there. The number that always brings me back to this work is 1 in 4. 1 in 4 people with vulvas will go through some version of this in their lifetime, and the majority will never receive a proper diagnosis, never be referred to the right specialist, never even hear the right words. That is the reality this podcast exists inside of, and it's what I'm trying in my small way to push back against. Okay, so here is the most important thing I can tell you in this episode. Pains down there is not a black box. It can feel like one, and it's often treated like one, but it is not a black box. There are reasons, there are root causes, there are specific, nameable, treatable things happening in your body. Muscles that are too tight, nerves that are irritated, hormones that are out of balance, tissue that is inflamed, skin conditions that mimic other things. Sometimes it's one of these, and sometimes it's several at once, layered on top of each other, which is part of why it can be so hard to untangle. But there is a reason, and that means there is a path through. The problem, and I want to be honest with you about this, is that the medical world has not caught up yet. Most doctors, even good ones, do not get more than a few hours of training on vulvovaginal pain in their entire education, if any at all. That's not their fault, and it's definitely not yours, but it does mean that you are often going to know more about your own condition than the person sitting across from you in a clinic. And that is a strange, exhausting, sometimes infuriating position to be in. Which brings me to the next thing. You are going to have to advocate for yourself. And yes, that's not fair, because I wish I could tell you that if you just find the right doctor, everything will be taken care of. For some people, that happens, but for most of us, it does not, at least not at first. You're probably going to have to do some of the work of figuring this out yourself. You're going to have to learn the vocabulary. You're going to have to push back when someone dismisses you. You're going to have to ask for referrals, potentially do your own reading, and keep going when you feel like giving up. Now, that is not fair. It should not be this way. And one of the reasons I made this podcast is because I believe it should not be this way, and I want to be part of changing it. But in the meantime, while the system catches up, you can be your own best advocate. And you do not have to do it alone. This is what this platform is for. Every episode I put out is a piece of the puzzle. a specialist explaining a treatment, a patient sharing a story, a researcher walking through the evidence. And the goal is that by listening, you build up the knowledge you need to walk into any appointment and hold your own. With that being said, I want to say this clearly because I think you need to hear it. This can all be extremely hard. It can suck. It can feel on the bad days like it's never going to end. I've had those days, a lot of them, and yet you will get through it. There are ways through it. People do get better. People do have sex again, they use tampons again, sit comfortably again, feel like themselves again. Not always all the way, not always quickly, but meaningfully, really meaningfully better. And I'm never going to promise you a cure because I'm not a doctor and I do not know your body, but I'm going to promise you that there are options. There are treatments, there are specialists, there are people who have walked this road before you and who are on the other side of it now. And the reason I am so sure of this is because I talk to them every week on this show. If this episode has resonated with you or given you something, here's what I want you to do. Please just stay with us. Keep listening. I have episodes on all the main conditions: vulvodynia, vaginismus, vestibulodynia, pudendal neuralgia, and more. I have episodes on specific treatments, on hormones, on pelvic floor physical therapy, on the research that is happening right now. You do not have to listen in any particular order. Just pick the one that sounds most like your situation and start there. And if you want a map of where to go next, my website has the full episode library organized by topic. And if you want another format, you can also head to our Instagram page, which is at the world's tightest community, where I share the key takeaways from these episodes and hopefully give you bite-sized information that you can actually use. But mostly, just keep listening. This is not a podcast you finish in a week. It is a resource that you can come back to. So to close off, thank you for being here. Thank you for trusting me with your time, especially if you're in a hard place right now. If you ever feel like talking to someone, I truly love hearing from you. We can voice note, we can do a call, especially in those dark hours where you feel like nothing is working and you've lost hope. So please do not be a stranger. Reach out. Thank you for being here. New episodes drop every Monday, so hopefully I will see you in the next one.